What is up, everybody? It's 414 Anime here for Anime Uproar, and today I will be breaking down just how strong Kenpachi Zaraki is from the Bleach series. Kenpachi is an absolute monster when it comes to his combat skills, so to break down this legendary force of brute strength that is Kenpachi Zaraki, in this video we will be breaking down Kenpachi's strength, looking into his powers, abilities, fights, and more, so make sure to stay tuned for this. Of course, we have made a load of Bleach videos on the channel now, including an hour-long video covering Ichigo's power, so make sure to check that video out after this one. Link to that is, of course, in the video description below. Now, if you do enjoy these Bleach videos on the channel and you'd like to see more, guys, you know what to do. Smash that like button, as it really does help us out a lot. If you haven't already, make this the video that you subscribe and hit that notification bell to turn on all notifications. Of course, you can also follow us on both Twitter and Instagram at Anime Uproar. And guys, now without further ado, let's jump into it, spoilers and all. So Kenpachi Zaraki is the captain of the 11th Division within the Soul Society's military organization, the Gotai 13. He is known for his fierce fighting style, immense strength, and his love of battle. Now, Kenpachi made his first appearance in Chapter 65 of the manga and Episode 20 of the anime series. Kenpachi is a tall and muscular man standing at a whopping 6'7" and weighs 198 pounds. He has the iconic spiky black hair and also has a distinctive scar running down the left side of his face, which was actually inflicted on him by none other than Retsu Unohana, while Kenpachi was still a child. Kenpachi's hair has grown past his shoulders now and no longer has his bells. This was 17 months after Aizen was defeated. His eye patch is now also just a single piece, covering only his right eye, which is black and grey in colour. So let's look into the personality of the man. Kenpachi loves a good fight more than anything, and the guy lives for combat. In fact, in an effort to prolong any conflict, he even holds back. He says that suffering harm or losing one's life is simply the cost of a good fight. You gotta love that attitude, man. Kenpachi, despite his fondness for brutality, usually ends a fight if his opponent is too hurt to continue. You know, he's not interested in battling weaklings who can't fight anymore. And as such, he does not feel compelled to kill anyone who is unable to defend themselves. On the other hand, Kenpachi frequently demonstrates his admiration for those who are able to challenge or even defeat him. The most well-known example is, of course, Ichigo Kurosaki. Kenpachi has regarded him as a member of his own division ever since Ichigo dealt him his first, I guess you could say, known defeat since his match with Retsu Unohana. Kenpachi just consistently professes his desire for a rematch with Ichigo every time that they encounter him. And of course, despite Ichigo's flat-out refusal to give him said rematch, he does view Ichigo as an ally. It's got to be said, though, that in battle, Kenpachi does occasionally defy his own logic. You know, in an effort to get stronger, he employs a variety of strategies to contain his power in order to prolong and, intensify the battle. This includes battling with just a single hand. Now, in terms of combat, Kenpachi does lack a wide range of skills, especially when you compare him to the other Gotai 13 captains, and this is all mainly because he did not attend the Shinigami Academy. However, he more than made up for his shortcomings with his sheer strength, tenacity, and intelligence. And this was all before he even used any of his Zanpakuto's true power. He became a very skilled combatant through years of training and experience, allowing him to easily overwhelm his opponent with simple and direct tactics. He uses just instinct, reflexes, and present observation to fight. He has no predetermined attack style, and he continuously gets better with each and every encounter. This approach to battle allows him to instantly change his own tactics to match his opponents, making it near impossible for them to keep up or predict him. It's his own insane and, quite frankly, monstrous power combined with the ease to switch things up on the fly that easily make Kenpachi one of the strongest and most feared Shinigami in all of the Gotai 13. Strength-wise, Kenpachi is just an absolute beast. He has an incredible high level of physical strength, which is most frequently demonstrated by his tendency to repel massively sized weapons and attacks from his opponents with, again, just that single arm. His offensive power enables him to sever buildings with just a single flick of his wrist and, fling opponents back during a weapons battle. He can also easily cut through the steel-hard hero of an Arrancar. All in all, he is pretty much a cheat code in this respect. He has the strength to kick grown men through walls and grab Ichigo's giant Zanpakuto and pull him in just for an attack of his own. He is also capable of ramming straight through thick walls without taking any damage himself, obviously when he was chasing Ichigo, which was very, very, very fun to see. The guy's just a beast, man. Absolute beast. Now, it's not just strength. Kenpachi has very quick and agile physical speeds for his stature and build before learning the basics of Shunpo. Kenpachi's own natural acceleration more than compensated for his lack of Shunpo due to the immense raw strength that he had in his legs. This enabled him to move quickly enough to close a wide gap in distance between him and his opponent and even appear to vanish from view. He can strike quickly and repeatedly during combat, which makes it extremely difficult for his opponents to locate a gap and launch a counterattack of their own against him. Now, sometime after his battle with Unohana in the 1,000-year Blood War arc, which we will cover later on, Kenpachi actually did start to develop some skill in the Shunpo technique to enhance his overall abilities in combat. So let's talk the sword. Kenpachi's proficiency with the sword has been refined to almost a masterful degree. This allows him to strike repeatedly with different attack types and patterns without any problems at all. He always fights with one hand free, only employing both hands against opponents that he feels will outmatch him otherwise. Examples of this would be Nnoitra and briefly Ichigo, thanks to, of course, Ichigo's undeveloped talent but great sword power. Now, when using both hands, Kenpachi uses a technique called Ryoden. This is a clean strike, splitting his opponent in half with both hands on his Zanpakuto's hilt. And you can't even begin to imagine how powerful he is with both hands. He is one, if not the most skilled swordsman in all of the Soul Society, and is the captain of the 11th Division, which, of course, focuses on sword fighting. Now, Kenpachi hates the idea of using sword skills and techniques that he hadn't learned himself, but instead gained from others. These techniques and skills he had picked up are only ever used as a very last resort. Now, head captain Genryusai Yamamoto had actually compelled Kenpachi to practice Shinigami Zanjutsu before he joined the Gotai 13. And of course, as a result, Kenpachi of course has some proficiency in it. He has an exceptionally high level of skill in Kendo and can use it to defeat multiple Shinigami at once. This is a really funny fact here, but Kenpachi's training only lasted a day. This was because Central 46 were concerned that, if he had finished and mastered it, he would grow way too strong and pose a great threat to the Serite. This is just how much of a beast Kenpachi is when it comes to his swordsmanship. Now, it's not all swordsmanship. While Kenpachi of course prefers to use his blade in battle, he has actually shown on numerous occasions that he is quite dangerous when fighting bare-handed and has impressive brawling skills. With just one hand, he can easily block an opponent's strike, deliver strong punches and kicks, and quickly take down and toss opponents. So like we mentioned, Kenpachi loves battle, but he will handicap himself, and he has equipment for this. For Kenpachi, fighting is absolutely everything, and his preference is that he battles the strongest opponents for as long as he can. Like we mentioned, even handicapping himself to make these challenges more thrilling and exciting to him in the process. So in order to draw these battles out for as long as he can, he actually utilizes some equipment to give his opponent the edge over him. Not only that, but this is to challenge himself and push beyond his own limits in a weakened state. So the first is his eye patch. This isn't just a visually striking detail, but does actually have a use. So Kenpachi is sporting an eye patch that was made at his request by the Shinigami Research and Development Institute. It also seals the majority of his Rei Ryoku, in addition to lowering his depth awareness and field of view. He wears this because he enjoys fighting so much that he can't fight most opponents at full power because he'd easily beat them. However, even when wearing this eye patch, he's still at least extremely competitive with most opponents. The second piece of equipment are, of course, his bells. Kenpachi has bells on each of his hair spikes to further give his opponent the upper hand. Only adversaries whose Ryotsu is focused to the point where it can truly defeat Kenpachi can hear those bells. Of course, like we mentioned earlier, after the victory over Aizen, Kenpachi stopped donning these bells. So in terms of equipment, let's look at the obvious. Kenpachi's Zanpakuto is called Nozarashi, which when translated from Japanese means weather beaten. This links into its appearance really well. So appearance-wise, the blade is substantially longer than the typical Zanpakuto. It's actually around the size of a Nnoitra. The blade is also very chipped and looks extremely worn down. However, despite its rugged and tattered look, this blade is more than capable of slicing through nearly anything with ease. And the hilt and braid of his sword are also both white. Of course, Kenpachi and the relationship with his Zanpakuto is a very interesting topic. Kenpachi was the only member of the Gotai 13 who was unable to perform either of his blade's awakened states, nor could he identify the name of his Zanpakuto before becoming a captain. Kenpachi was actually unable to hear the cry of his sword because of the discord between him and it. This in turn harmed both of their abilities. Their discord reduced its spiritual power, making it more vulnerable to attack. However, of course, after his battle with Ichigo, Kenpachi wanted to know more about his Zanpakuto so that he could grow stronger and understand the suffering associated with not having a name, as of course being someone who could relate to this harsh feeling. Furthermore, later, when Kenpachi had defeated Retsu Unohana in combat and had reawakened his true strength, he had at last heard his Zanpakuto, which we will be covering in more detail later on the video, so make sure to stay tuned for that. So before moving forward, we must look back. Another interesting aspect when it comes to not only Kenpachi's power, but also him as a character is looking into his history as well as the bond he formed with a very unique individual. For as long as he could remember, he had never had a name, so he finally decided to adopt the surname of the district he had formerly called home, which was Zaraki. Zaraki was District 80 of the North Alley of Rukongai. Now, just to give you an idea of just how bad this district was, Section 1 was the most orderly and law-abiding, whereas way further down the list of districts stood District 80. District 80 was, the worst and most lawless area of Rukongai. It was full of robbers and murderers alike. So when Kenpachi was a small child living in the Rukongai's alleys, he came across a Shinigami's dead body and seized his Asachi. An Asachi is the name given to the nameless Zanpakuto that is wielded by the lowest class of Shinigami, who are still currently in training themselves and are not actually a part of the Gotai 13 just yet. So eventually Kenpachi imprinted his own soul into the blade, which created his own Zanpakuto. He gradually honed his swordsmanship through that time, killing many adversaries along the way. Now, at some point, he ran into Yachiiro Unohana and engaged her in combat. Yachiiro Unohana is actually the name Captain Retsu Unohana once went by, which starts connecting some dots, right? Now, Unohana was actually once the most diabolical criminal in all of the Soul Society. Hard to believe, right? Yamamoto actually sought her out when putting the Gotai 13 together, and she became the first captain of the 11th Division, as well as the first Kenpachi. During a mission, she came across a boy who attacked her on sight, and the two went on to fight. That boy was none other than the young Kenpachi Zaraki. In this fight, Kenpachi felt terror for the very first time, and as such, he had grown weary of cutting anything else. It was also the first combat he had ever loved. Now, he lost to her here because he unconsciously sealed his power to prolong the battle. And after said battle, he started to adore her after their fight and wished he could fight like her. Later, when Kenpachi was a young man, he came across a small girl. He gave her the name Yachiiro in honor of the one person he had ever admired. This name was given to the small girl because she displayed no fear of his sword. Now, Yachiiro is from Kusajishi's District 79, where her parents were assassinated not long before Kenpachi had shown up. It was also on that day that he assumed the name Kenpachi, which is given to the strongest Shinigami in every generation. The Shinigami who has killed the most adversaries and triumphed in the greatest of combat. Now, one day he ran into Ikaku Madarame and Yumichika Ayasagawa. Ikaku was cautioned by Ichiro not to meddle with Kenpachi while he was in a good mood, but of course, Ikaku did not heed the advice. The two began to fight, and Ikaku was forced to go on the defensive in order to fend off Kenpachi's constant attacks because of his overwhelming strength. Ikaku attempted to overpower Kenpachi as the two battled on, but was of course unable to do so. And even though Kenpachi said he was having fun here, he did make the decision to defeat Ikaku by striking him with one single decisive strike. Later, in front of nearly 200 men of the division, Kenpachi executed Kenpachi Kiganjo, the captain of the Gotai 13's 11th Division, with just a single strike again. Kenpachi assumed command of that division as of the third captain qualification trial. He became the 11th person to wield the title by killing the 11th Division captain, making him the sole legitimate holder of the title, Kenpachi. Now, both Ikaku and Yumichika, who had already joined the division and became Shinigami themselves, joined Kenpachi the following day at his first address to his new division. So, knowing Kenpachi's backstory, let's look at the first time we see him in action, which was against none other than the series protagonist Ichigo Kurosaki during the Soul Society arc. This fight was truly so hype, and they certainly built it up. They were telling us just how fearsome an opponent Kenpachi was, and at the same time Kenpachi was relentlessly hunting down Ichigo, you know, the strongest Ryoka who had infiltrated the Soul Society to rescue Rukia Kuchiki from her execution. Now, while pointing out that it has openings, Kenpachi actually praises Ichigo's battle stance and confesses that he admires his spiritual pressure. Recognizing that Ichigo is still weaker than him, Kenpachi chooses to give Ichigo a chance, despite the fact he acknowledges he can see why Ikaku had lost to him. Now, Kenpachi does something extremely bold here and something so boss. Kenpachi actually orders Ichigo to cut him wherever he wants without holding back while baring his chest at him. Of course, Ichigo was extremely hesitant to do so. While praising Ichigo for his refusal to assault an unarmed opponent, Kenpachi remarks that it is only a handicap and advises that Ichigo should save his compassion for somebody else. Kenpachi then drops one of the most boss lines you'd expect from him as he gives Ichigo the option to kill or be killed. Ichigo finally goes in for the attack, but his strike causes 0 damage to Kenpachi, and actually he ends up being the one bleeding from the strike himself. At this moment, Kenpachi was utterly disappointed with Ichigo as he wanted a worthy opponent to fight against, but of course here Ichigo wasn't proving to be that. In fact, he was far from that. As the battle waged on, Ichigo was improving, which was pleasing and exciting Kenpachi as it had been such a long time since he fought in a battle that was worthy of his time. However, Ichigo was still struggling to cut Kenpachi. Now, after learning that Kenpachi couldn't activate the release stages of his Zanpakuto, Ichigo did become overconfident and in turn dropped his guard. He failed to notice and respect the brute power that was Kenpachi Zaraki at this current level. And this resulted in Ichigo not only having his own Zanpakuto sliced by Kenpachi's, but he was also left with a very fatal injury as Kenpachi simply walked away from the fight. However, Zangetsu would come to Ichigo's aid and this battle would reach its epic climax. The moment Ichigo stands up, a strong spiritual pressure rushes over him. Kenpachi receives a major injury to his left side from his shoulder down the side of his chest as a result of Ichigo's attack, which, of course, here further surprises and excites him. After avoiding Ichigo's next blow, Kenpachi thrusts his blade into a nearby structure. The fight is just getting started, says Kenpachi, who is grinning and feeling quite thrilled. He adds that they should prolong the fight. Now, to get closer to Ichigo, he lunges at him and allows Ichigo's blade to gash his face. Here, Zaraki removes his eye patch and declares that Ichigo is a worthy opponent, thus it only makes sense to fight him at full strength, as he is realizing here that he and Ichigo are now evenly matched. He is also relishing the overwhelming thrill and exhilaration of the moment. As Kenpachi takes off his eye patch, his spiritual powers soars, leaving Ichigo perplexed to what is happening. Ichigo, who is now more powerful than he has ever been before, declares he would never lose to someone like Kenpachi, who just fights for himself. After explaining that his power has surged thanks to him partnering up with his Zanpakuto Zangetsu, Kenpachi thinks this is absurd. He queries whether Zangetsu is Ichigo's Zanpakuto, battling alongside it and utilizing his might. According to Kenpachi, Zanpakuto are merely weapons of war. They are tools, and fighting beside one is an act reserved for losers who are too scared to go at it alone. They both charge at each other in one final attack while simultaneously releasing enough spiritual pressure to bring down all of the nearby structures. The pair do land finishing blows on one another. Ichigo does fall first, but Kenpachi declares Ichigo the winner of their battle. Now, this battle was super important for Kenpachi's growth as it opened his eyes to how he had been treating his own Zanpakuto and that it wasn't a weakness to work together with it, but it would actually make him stronger. Badly injured after the battle, Kenpachi raises his broken Zanpakuto into the air and admits that he had been ignoring it for the longest time and that he finally felt that he wanted to communicate with it. This will truly accelerate Kenpachi's powers and abilities later on. Of course, in that battle, we also got to see just how insane Kenpachi's spiritual power is. Kenpachi's Rei-Ryoku is monster leveled, even by a captain's standards. Kenpachi admits that he lacks the ability to control his spiritual energy, which is always very strong, and he must rely on his eye patch to keep this spiritual power controlled. Now, he can still utilize it freely and in a number of ways despite this. It can have a wide-ranging, mile-long impact and send people there into a condition of disorientation and immobility. Now, when Kenpachi uses his energy, the sheer might of it will do a great deal of harm, demolishing the region around him and throwing more vulnerable foes into the air. This can also block or deflect the majority of opponents' attacks and abilities. Kenpachi's spirit power's intensity also serves as a kind of armor, protecting him against anyone who isn't at least as powerful as him. He of course initially showed this in the fight against Ichigo in the Soul Society. And like we mentioned earlier, he chooses to suppress his spirit energy using this eye patch, but prior to receiving the eye patch, Kenpachi had actually unconsciously concealed the majority of his true power for centuries. And though suppressed, his fighting prowess is never visibly hampered by his energy sealing eye patch. Of course, following Unohana's defeat, Kenpachi significantly strengthens his command over his Rei-Ryatsu. So Kenpachi is far more than brute strength. He has frequently shown a remarkably excellent understanding of many situations, despite his dislike for any plan making when it comes to battle. Kenpachi's capacity to comprehend concepts he has had no first-hand experience with outstanded even Byakuya himself. Additionally, he has the ability to spot flaws in his adversary's fighting strategies and assault patterns, as well as to swiftly shift and modify his own strategies to effectively counter them. We saw this in his fight with Kaname Tozen in the Soul Society arc. He allowed Tozen to strike him in order to catch his opponent off guard and strike back at him himself as he was defenseless against Tozen's Bankai that took away all of his senses except the feeling of touch. Kenpachi himself is highly perceptive about the human nature. He is able to pick out minor differences between people and understands the motivations behind their acts. He even accurately identified both Kaname Tozen and Gin Ichimaru as the only captains who were frightened of dying. Back to the fight with Tozen, it was his excellent instincts for impending danger which let him avoid Tozen's attacks while still under the influence of his Bankai. The reason his strategy worked here is down to the combination of his own physical state and his resilience. Now, you can very much liken Kenpachi to that of a berserker. Kenpachi frequently shows no symptoms of agony despite having numerous slash and pierce wounds on his body. Instead, he tends to overlook the majority of the wounds he receives during combat. During this battle with Tozen, he of course allowed himself to be stabbed in order to seize Tozen's blade and counteract the effects of his Bankai. This insanity, or brilliance depending on how you look at it, is continued in his fight against the 5th ranked Espada, Nnoitra. Kenpachi sustained several slash wounds during his encounter with Nnoitra. He was even impaled and nearly beheaded. However, Kenpachi showed no sight impairment to his fighting ability. Nnoitra even noted that most individuals would have already been dead at this point. Their fight was actually a really good one and another display of the monstrous force that is Kenpachi Zaraki. So, Nnoitra makes an early mistake. He tells Kenpachi that he will never be cut by his blade. Unfazed by this, Kenpachi fights Nnoitra even more fiercely, much to the surprise of the Espada. When Nnoitra successfully avoids an attack, Kenpachi says that it must have been risky for him to do so. Nnoitra simply brushes this off as a reaction and carries on with the fight until Kenpachi stabs him in the eye, covered by his eye patch. Here claiming that he has never encountered an opponent whose eyes and neck could not be cut. Nnoitra, who is unaffected however, shows the fragments of his hollow mask and the hole that was hidden beneath his eye patch. This becomes a match of who can cut who. Kenpachi eventually lands one, sending Nnoitra into a rage, and he begins to fight with much more ferocity until Kenpachi's eye patch is then knocked off. Nnoitra explodes in a fit of wrath after Kenpachi explains the significance of his eye patch. When Nnoitra inquires as to how it feels for an Espada to unleash their Zanpakuto for the first time, Kenpachi simply smiles and responds that he has a nice Ryatsu and that it feels as though his Ryatsu is sharpening his sword. The fight between the two goes on as Kenpachi is forced to use his last resort, which was the kendo training he had received. Though he acknowledges it had been a while since he has utilized kendo, he decides to do so in this battle, although of course reluctantly. Nnoitra becomes confused, so Kenpachi decides to explain his kendo training, however the explanation is short-lived. Kenpachi swings his blade down as Nnoitra charges after him, growing bored with the argument. Here, Kenpachi, holding his sword in both hands, strikes Nnoitra with a strong blow that nearly cuts him in two, removing several of his limbs and causes a fatal wound to his chest. He turns to leave after being surprised to see the Espada still alive. Nnoitra yells that the fight is not over, but as we know, Kenpachi finds no sport in, finishing weakened opponents who can't defend themselves, so here he simply chooses to walk away. This understandably angers Nnoitra, who continues to goad Kenpachi until he finally decides to give the Espada what he wants and delivers the finishing blow. Killer fight, that one, and I just remembered it being so hype when I first saw it. Kenpachi is just a demonic presence that you want more and more of. It had also been a while since we last saw him in action, and this battle did not disappoint at all. We got to see him push to his limits, and we also got to see how he had progressed since we last saw him in battle. And that's the thing with Kenpachi, he is a lot like Ichigo in the sense of, the more damage he sustains, the stronger he comes back once healed. Again, I likened this to the Saiyans from the Dragon Ball franchise and how they get stronger after suffering a loss. It does make the hopeful rematch between Kenpachi and Ichigo all the more mouthwatering, though I'm sure Ichigo will stay way clear of that situation. So we of course see Kenpachi in the fight against Yami, where he continues to show off just how amazing and terrifying he is when it comes to combat. I, for one, would most certainly never want to come up against Kenpachi as an opponent, that's for sure. However, we're going to move on to the events in the 1000-Year Blood War arc here, where we got to see the real and major improvements in not only Kenpachi's power, but in his character too. So we first see Kenpachi in this arc in a very typically hype Kenpachi moment. Kenpachi makes his entrance by facing Yuha while carrying the bodies of 3 Stern Ritters on his shoulders. Kenpachi is asked how he vanquished the 3 of them so quickly, but he dismisses this and moves in to attack Yuha while sprinting forward. Here, Yuha blocks the sword assault with his arm, causing a massive shockwave that devastates the landscape around them. Now, this fight doesn't go down too well. Yuha, who is now holding the bloody captain up by the throat, has effortlessly defeated Kenpachi. He claims that he had thought of the captain as one of their 5 special war potentials and comes to the conclusion that he has overestimated Kenpachi, calling him weak. And that's how much of a beast Yuha is, by the way. To simply disregard Kenpachi as just weak and that he overestimated him? Wow. Just wow. Luckily, head captain Genryusai Yamamoto appears and grabs Kenpachi from Yuha's hands, sparing Kenpachi from any further suffering. Kenpachi is said to have narrowly avoided dying after the struggle for the Soul Society being left in a comatose state. Now, after a few days and recovering from his injuries, what happens next for Kenpachi is huge for his growth. So huge that the Kenpachi we get after this fight is nothing like we have ever seen from him in a very, very hype way. So, Retsu Unohana is instructed by the new Captain Commander Shunsui Kuriko to lead Kenpachi to the lowest level of the Central Great Underground Prison so that he will be trained to become much stronger and attain his full potential. The two captains start their combat to the death after it is revealed that they have both previously left physical scars on one another. And it's here we get to see just how much of a beast Unohana is too. For the longest time, we only ever associated her as a healer, being the captain of Squad 4. But here, we get to see that she is way more than just a healer. In fact, she is one of the most strongest captains ever. Going off that notion, we actually made a video ranking the captains from Bleach weakest to strongest. If you want to see where both Unohana and Kenpachi ranked in our list, a link to that video will be in the description below. I think you'll be very surprised. So, back to the fight. Unohana completely overwhelms Kenpachi, deflecting his attacks with her free hand and legs as the latter is on the losing end of this fight. Unohana cannot help but compliment him for taking off his eye patch at the very beginning of their fight, but she points out that by doing so, he is also battling at the limit of his abilities. Here she labels Kenpachi as weak and continues to stab him with a concealed knife. She claims that those who only fight with one hand without using the other for anything else do not look like they enjoy fighting to her. Kenpachi says she has changed from the time he used to look up to her and belittles her for utilizing tactics she had not used in their previous fights. Here, Kenpachi's sword is knocked out of his hands, and Unohana pins him against the wall before claiming that she hasn't changed and that he simply didn't allow her the opportunity to utilize her tactics the last time they battled. Kenpachi, who admits that he had admired her, says that until this battle with Unohana, he had never experienced fear. It was at this point that he decided he wanted to fight like her. Unohana then stabs Kenpachi in the throat as he becomes aware that he might die before defeating her. When Kenpachi momentarily passes out, something catches his eye and awakens him. Unohana notices this and inquires as to what happened, as it appeared that he had briefly lost consciousness. Kenpachi keeps fighting her despite her question and whatever had captured his attention. And I like this fight for Kenpachi as there is almost a deeper, more emotional feel to it rather than his pure battle lust. Unohana is the pinnacle of his respect and the one person he feels he must defeat above any other to be the best. Now, Kenpachi is continuously wounded and knocked out as the struggle goes on. He eventually lands some damage on Unohana as she continues to heal him. He realizes that he is behaving on instinct now, when before he was simply responding to her sword. He continues, oblivious that the unconscious boundaries he set for himself during their initial conflict are now being released. That every time he regains consciousness, it feels like he has been born again. Unaware that each time a seal on his power is released, he is reborn as a stronger version of himself, and that at last he is returning to his former self. And now he rushes back to clash blades with her. When he first faced Unohana, Kenpachi had experienced the thrill of fighting on the edge and was far removed from his daily encounters with weaklings. She was the first person he encountered who was at a comparable level to the power of him. Kenpachi didn't want to kill her because that would mean that he would never get to experience this level of joy again, so he sealed his own power deep within himself just so that he could match her. What Unohana was doing here was removing these seals that he had created so that he could finally become the real Kenpachi she knew he was. She knew that in doing so it would result in her own death, but it was the fact that her death was the only way Kenpachi could move forward. So, back to their battle. Despite receiving a severe hit, Unohana pushes Kenpachi back while healing herself and begins to use her Bankai, which sadly we never got to see, by the way. I bet it was boss. Now Kenpachi is thoroughly enjoying himself as the combat heats up and he chuckles uncontrollably. He thinks to himself that this is actual fighting and is appreciative to Unohana. Unohana is stabbed in the chest as Kenpachi finally wins over the one warrior he truly ever looked up to. Kenpachi draws back his blade and drops it as Unohana thanks him while passing away in his arms. As his opponent loses consciousness and passes away, aware that this is the last encounter with her he'll ever get, Kenpachi yells out in fury, pleading with her not to die. Suddenly, Kenpachi hears a voice. As he turns to face the voice, he discovers that it was his Zanpakuto crying out to him out of the blue. The Zanpakuto he believed had no name finally responds to him. After all this time, his sword is finally able to speak to him. He can hear his Zanpakuto telling him that it has always been beside him in battle, watching him and remaining loyal to him. It introduces itself as Nnoitra. Now, there is another big twist involving Nnoitra, but we won't get into that juicy one till a bit later on in Kenpachi's story, so again, stay tuned for that one. So, Kenpachi moves towards Yachiiro after sensing a decrease in her Ryatsu. He bursts straight through a wall and finds the Stern Ritter, only to feel disappointment that Gremmy is the one causing trouble here. Gremmy, again, is another opponent who is foolish enough to claim that he cannot be cut by Kenpachi. I just feel like that is like a statement that never ends well when they claim to lay down that challenge. So Gremmy elevates the ground to create a platform for their conflict. Kenpachi charges towards Gremmy after hearing his insult, but his blade is halted. Now, Gremmy's power is that he has the ability to bring into reality anything that he can imagine. Here, he imagined that his skin was like iron and thus resistant to Kenpachi's blade. Kenpachi, however, declares he can cut through anything Gremmy can conceive after hearing Gremmy explain his powers to him. Gremmy, of course, boasts arrogantly that he won't need any of his fingers to defeat Kenpachi. Instead, he'll just use his mind. However, his strategies have little effect on the new and improved Kenpachi. Gremmy's just one of those. He had always believed that he was, the strongest. Therefore, he never felt the need to compete because he believed that he had nothing to prove. However, Kenpachi has brought out his lust for battle and now he wants to crush Kenpachi. However, this doesn't go to plan as Kenpachi, of course, lands a cut on him, reaffirming that there is nothing indeed that Kenpachi Zaraki cannot cut. So, their battle rages on and we get to see Gremmy's powers on full display as well as Kenpachi's new and improved state. Gremmy is of course flustered by Kenpachi and his relentlessness to attack, but pulls out his big move. Kenpachi keeps attacking Gremmy, constantly taking advantage of his inaction to react quick enough and repeatedly slices at him while also cutting through the constant structures Gremmy has made. A puzzled Kenpachi inquires whether Gremmy is imagining his own demise after cutting him multiple times. After tending to his wounds, Gremmy thanks Kenpachi for bringing this to his attention, and before making a copy of himself, declares that he will unveil his most powerful technique. Gremmy warns that the clone will survive any of Kenpachi's attacks and points out a massive meteorite that is heading straight for the Serite. Kenpachi tells his sword it's great to find something he hasn't yet slashed and calls it Nnoitra, as Gremmy declares this attack will destroy both Kenpachi and the entire Serite. Here, Kenpachi claims that Gremmy is the one who is powerless and leaps at the meteorite when Gremmy explains to him that he cannot destroy the meteorite because it already exists. Kenpachi, of course, smashes the meteorite by releasing the actual form of Nnoitra, causing pieces to fall all around him as he stands tall with his Shikai finally revealed. Kenpachi, boldly as ever, claims he can simply cut through anything after Gremmy brands him a monster for being able to destroy a meteorite with a single blow. Gremmy also declares this means he will just have to kill Kenpachi with something that has no form and encloses him in a sizable pocket of space surrounding Kenpachi with more of his own clones. Gremmy explains to Kenpachi that he would die a slow and horrible death in space, but as he does so, Kenpachi cuts clean through one of Gremmy's clones, cutting himself out of the void in the process. Kenpachi does get caught in a massive explosion as the other clones latch onto him, but he makes it out with only moderate burns and scratches to his own body. Here, Gremmy sees this as further evidence of Kenpachi just being like that of a monster and declares that he will grow stronger than Kenpachi himself. Now, as his transformation takes place, his veins protrude. He then races at Kenpachi, but as his body tries to catch up with his transformation, his body starts to tear itself apart in mid-air. Kenpachi taunts Gremmy as he plummets to the ground below for mistaking him for a monster and losing as a result of that thought. Ironically, becoming a monster like Kenpachi was too much for him to handle. Also, interestingly, after the conclusion of this battle, Kenpachi's Lieutenant Yachiiro had vanished. We can assume that this is because she has actually merged with Kenpachi's Zanpakuto because she was always a part of his power that was waiting to be awakened. This is an interesting thought, right? So, with his Shikai seeing the light of day in the series, let's look into it. prior to his battle with Unohana before Kenpachi knew its name, the Soul Society thought that Nnoitra was forced into a constantly released condition due to Kenpachi's overwhelming Ryatsu. However, we know now that that is not the case. So, Drink is his Shikai's release command, and Nnoitra transforms into a big axe war cleaver hybrid thing with a lengthy cloth-wrapped handle as soon as it is freed. As we saw in his battle with the Stern Ritter Gremmy, Nnoitra can easily destroy a large meteorite with just one attack while it's in its release state, and this is due to its incredibly increased attack power. Its cutting ability is also substantially increased, enabling Kenpachi to easily cut through the bodies of his adversaries and even the fabric of space itself. So the next significant encounter that sheds light on Kenpachi is in his final battle with the Stern Ritter Gerard Valkyrie. When he arrives to help Captains Toshiro Hitsugaya and Byakuya Kuchiki, he cuts off Gerard's forearm right away. However, the Stern Ritter has a special ability called the Miracle. The Miracle is an ability that Gerard himself has described as the power to create miracles on himself through thoughts, feelings, and his own desires. His ability allows him to swing the tide in his favor through probability manipulation. If Gerard is in a battle where the odds are strongly stacked against him, the Miracle allows him to succeed regardless of how bad a situation he is in. Nevertheless, Kenpachi is persistent and fights to close the gap between their strengths. Kenpachi and Gerard continue to fight, with Kenpachi gradually losing the advantage, as Gerard points out the diminishing force of his blows before slamming him to the ground. Here, Kenpachi is then confronted by none other than Yachiiro, or I guess we could call her Nozarashi, the spirit of his Zanpakuto. She informs him that the fun is only just getting started. Nozarashi remarks that Kenpachi could cut down anyone if he utilized her properly, before explaining that this is the power known as Bankai. While explaining this, an energy starts to pour down Kenpachi's arm from where she had touched him. Now, Kenpachi's Bankai doesn't have a name, but when activated, Kenpachi's Bankai sends out a massive surge of energy potent enough to destroy neighboring structures. Kenpachi resembles an Oni in this form because of his red complexion, numerous black marks all over his face, and the horns on his forehead. His sword also changes to a shorter, more jagged variant of its Shikai state that resembles a crude cleaver. Now, Kenpachi's Bankai gives him a significant boost in physical power and cutting ability, and this is the only Bankai we are aware of that really alters the wielder's state mentally and physically as well. In this guise, Kenpachi resembles a demon berserker who has gained tremendous strength and power. However, he does act without regard for his own life and in a frenzy of pure wrath. He is almost fully devoured when his Bankai is activated. In his Bankai form, Kenpachi appears to be able to cut anything, proving what Yachiiro earlier told him to be true. This is a theme that is frequently brought up throughout most of his battles, as his opponents constantly boast about having steel skin that cannot be cut, only for Kenpachi to prove them wrong. Here he then starts to attack Gerard, completely cutting off his arm. Kenpachi makes an attempt to continue the fight, but his right arm abruptly tears as we find out that Yachiiro was unable to contain the amount of force he produced, causing it to overwhelm him. This demonstrates how untapped Kenpachi's power is. Now, Gerard attacks Kenpachi without warning, and this reverts him to his regular form. Captain Hitsugaya approaches Gerard, who overwhelms him. However, Kenpachi is able to flip Gerard over and sever his feet, thus the battle ends in victory. And that's all we have on Kenpachi's battles. When it comes to powerhouses, Kenpachi Zaraki is just on another level entirely. He is incredibly tuned to combat, his swordsmanship is brutal, as is his expert battle senses. Words that are chosen to describe his power are words such as supernatural and immeasurable, which really gives us an understanding of just how much of a fearsome presence he really is. The guy is just an absolute force and a master of combat. The other captains tend to keep him at just like arm's length. So I hope this video allowed you to understand just how strong he is by pointing out the key points in his story and by highlighting his powers and abilities. Let us know in the comment section below which of his fights you enjoyed the most. Like I mentioned at the start of the video, we've also made a load of Bleach videos on the channel now, including that hour-long video on Ichigo's power, so make sure to check that video out. Link to that is, of course, in the description below. Of course, if you enjoyed this video and you'd like to see more Bleach videos on the channel, make sure to let us know by smashing that like button. If you haven't already, make this the video you subscribe and hit that notification bell to turn on all notifications, or you will miss future Anime Uproar videos. Remember, you can also follow us on Twitter and Instagram at Anime Uproar. Thanks again, and we can't wait to see you in the next one. Till next time, take care of yourselves. Peace, peace.